Okay, I'm going to go to the third one, which now we're going to create an arc. So in creating arcs, it's a little bit different of a process. Instead of just clicking and then releasing your mouse, which gives you straight lines, you're going to click, hold, and drag. So it's one fluid motion. And if you don't do it in one fluid motion, that's how things can get really screwed up quickly. Okay. Because if you happen to just click and release your mouse and then you click, hold, and drag, it's not going to do the same thing as if you do it all in one motion. So in this case, you're still going to start off with the pen tool. You're going to position your cursor on step one, and then you're going to click, hold, and drag straight up. And you're dragging up until your cursor reaches this red dot. And so this red dot is just simply a guide so that you know how long these handles, which is what you're manipulating here, and these handles can either get longer or shorter. They can turn at any angle. The longer they are away from the point, the more curved the line gets. The closer they are to the point, the straighter the line is. So in this case, this exercise has already been built for us that I'm going to move my cursor up to this red dot, and this handle should give me the exact length I need so that when I move my cursor over to step number 2 and complete the final piece of it, this arc that I'm trying to mimic will automatically be created and it'll be perfect. Now, the other thing to notice is that when I dragged up with my initial point, I did drag up. I didn't drag down. And the reason I dragged up is because these directional handles help you follow the direction in which you want the path to go. So since I know I'm arcing upward, that's why I dragged up rather than drag down. Now, when you go over to step number 2, obviously it's not the perfect arc that you want yet, which, by the way, just to recall from yesterday, notice that pink line that you see that stretches across horizontally. That's a smart guide. So that you can also use that as a visual to know whether you have your points perfectly lined up or not. So when you see that horizontal pink line, you now know that you're in a perfect position. And then I'm going to click, hold, and drag down until my cursor, or directional handle in this case, goes down to the red dot. Now, the reason I drag down this time is because notice these handles affect both sides of the point or of the arc. And so as I'm dragging down, the handle that's now going up is what's controlling the shape of this path. So I'm going to drag it down to the red dot, release my mouse. If I did it right, should almost be perfectly in between that gray stroke line. And then, of course, once I'm finished, I can grab my selection tool or the direct selection tool so that now I see the bounding box. So you're basically going to repeat those steps, and I'm going to let you work on this one on your own again for just a little bit too. You're going to repeat those steps, except as you can see here, the orange square is where you're going to start, the red square is where you're going to end. So this first one is basically just repeating the exercise we just did at the top. The next one, though, is going to be opposite. You're going to start over here on the right-hand side, which is the orange, and then work your way over to the red on the left. And then your third one is you're going to do a side arc. So you're going to start with the orange and then finish with the red. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to work on that as well, and then we will go through it together. Everybody got it?
Give me
Okay.
1 more second.
What's that?
Give me 1 more second.
Okay. Not trying to rush you. Just want to make sure you guys aren't sitting around waiting for me.
I mean, how do you know how far to do your second click away from your first click for the handle?
So, yeah, so a lot of it just comes with practice, and then the more you practice, the more intuitive you get. And it's one of these tools that honestly a lot of people, they don't use because it takes a little bit of work and training. But honestly, once you get it down, it's one of your most efficient tools, especially when you're trying to template very complex shapes, you know, like an illustration maybe that you're trying to turn into vector arc, or that you had hand drawn, or maybe you find a logo that just isn't real good quality, and so you basically have to recreate it. But there is no specific answer. It really just kind of comes with intuitiveness. So, for example, and then I'll still give you a couple more minutes to kind of finish this up. But like this arc, I mean, you don't have to do it with just 2 points. You know, they're indicating a point at the beginning and a point at the end. As you're practicing, you could actually do 3 points. You could click, hold, and drag up about to the top of that arc, and then take your cursor and go over here to the center of the top of the arc, and then click, hold, and drag to the right. And again, you're always dragging in the direction in which your next curve is going to go. And so that's why I drag to the right. If I drag to the left, notice this path ends up circling back on it. And if you get that, that's okay. Nothing's permanent about it. So all you do is just rotate your cursor around. And the further you move the directional handles, the more curved that line gets. The closer you are to the point, the more straight the line is. So you could literally just, you know, stretch it out just a little bit, and then go over here to the red dot, click, hold, and then drag down. The reason you drag down is because the opposite handle is actually what's affecting the arc on this particular illustration. So you can see you can actually do it with 3 points if you wanted to. Now, in most cases, in order for your paths to be as smooth as possible, you want to try to reduce the number of points that you're working with. So what can happen sometimes, especially in these arc scenarios, is if you don't make this top center point perfectly so that it's a nice, smooth, round arc, you will get more of a little bit of a point. So in other words, if I happen to move these handles just slightly because I didn't stretch them out far enough, you can see, and it's very subtle, but you can see how there's a little bit of a point going on right here versus it being a nice smooth. In fact, your real visual is if you look over here between the thickness and where my blue line falls within that gray background, it's obviously cutting it shorter on the inside rather than going right through the center of it. So again, there's kind of different ways that you can do it. And in the beginning, you know, as you're working with this and experimenting with it, you're probably going to make way more points than what you really need. And that's perfectly fine. What you don't want to do is get into a scenario like this. So let's say I start on the second activity. I click, hold, and drag just a little bit to get my first point going. And then I come over here to about the center of this first arc, if you will, click, hold, and drag. Now I could continue to do this, but again, if I don't drag far enough, then this is going to be a really bumpy arc, if you will. And you can start to see it already. You notice how it kind of dips right in here. So a lot of it just comes with practice, and then as you practice, you get intuitive about it. Now, what I do say to people, and then these really simple ones, it's not a whole lot applicable, because obviously you can see that we can do these arcs in just 2 points as long as we're dragging our handles far enough. But when you get into more complex illustrations, like let's assume this is a cup handle for a mug or whatnot, you can, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, sorry. Here's what you would do. Let me just, I'm going to mimic this just for one real quick second. Okay, so let's assume this is a mug that I'm trying to replicate. Okay. Then what I suggest people to do is look at the illustration and then see where lines break and where lines begin to change angles. So like in this particular case, obviously these straight lines are going to be completely different than where this arc begins. So probably right here in this section, I'm going to have a point of some sort because I have a very um, abrupt contrast between a straight line and then a curved line. Now, if I was going to make multiple paths or multiple points out of this arc right here, what I would do is kind of look at where the arc begins to break downward and then where it starts to then circle back upward. So again, in most cases, like a perfect circle in this case, or a perfect arc, I'm probably going to want to try to hit the center as accurately as possible. Now, again, there's no way to 100% figure out where that center is, but as you practice, you will be surprised how intuitive you'll start to get as far as where maybe your next point should be based on how long you have to drag the handle in order for it to replicate as close as possible. But in these beginning stages, you're going to have to do a lot of cleanup. That's just part of the process, and that's how you learn through it. So like for this side arc example, again, I'm going to start here on the orange square. I'm going to click, hold, and drag. I'm dragging to the left because that's the direction that this arc is going to go.